Crushed by the forces hurled against us. The Fall of France, June 5th to the 22nd, 1940. In context. Focus. Surrender of France. Before. 1923. French and Belgian troops occupied Germany's industrial Ruhr area to exact unpaid World War I reparations. September 3, 1939. 2 days after Germany's invasion of Poland, France and Britain declare war on Germany. May 1940. German forces advanced from Belgium into France and reached the English Channel, compelling British troops to evacuate in Dunkirk. After. July 19th, that same year, Hitler promotes 12 generals to the rank of Field Marshal to reward them for their victory over France. November 1942, Germany occupies Vichy, France. June 6, 1944, Allied troops land in Normandy on D-Day. On May 9th, the eve of the German offensive in Western Europe, Hitler promised his general staff, "Gentlemen, you are about to witness the most famous victory in history." By June 4th, with the British chased off the continent and French in disarray, their prediction was well on the way to coming true. The Germans now turned their attention to Hurled, or Plan Red, their scheme for taking over the rest of France, especially the French forces massed redundantly along the Maginot Line, France's fortified eastern border. French Commander-in-Chief Maxime Weygand had drawn up 49 divisions along the Somme and Aisne rivers in northeast France, the so-called Weygand Line, but his nation's situation was precarious. The British Expeditionary Force, or BEF, had fled, leaving only a handful of British forces still in France. The French had lost 22 of their 71 field divisions, 6 of 7 motorized divisions, and 8 of 20 armored divisions. Some 17 divisions were pinned down along the Maginot Line. As Hitler planned, the French Army's reserves had all been committed to the Low Countries in the wake of Germany's swoop across the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. The British Royal Air Force, or RAF for short, refused to send more planes. The advanced air striking force they had sent earlier lost Hurricanes at the rate of 25 a day, when the factories making them could only produce 4 or 5 daily. RAF factories making them could only produce. RAF chiefs knew that all available planes would be needed for the inevitable Battle of Britain. The French troops along the Weygand Line were outmatched and took forces in Roma just 2 days to break through near Rouen. On June 9th, the Germans crossed the Seine and Aisne. France was now at their mercy. In this picture, anti-tank fortifications mark the Maginot Line built by France in the 30s along its eastern border and designed to be an impenetrable barrier against invasion by human forces. The Exodus. On June 10th, the day that Italy declared war on France and Britain, the French government fled to Bordeaux, declaring Paris to be an open, non-militarized city in an attempt to spare it from destruction. Of the roughly 5 million Parisians, 3 million fled, joining millions more crowding the roads in what became known as the Exodus. The Exode. Amid horrifying scenes, nurses administered euthanizing injections to patients who could not be moved. Babies were abandoned. Looting by refugees and soldiers was widespread. On June 12th, a Swiss journalist encountered a herd of cattle wandering through the empty streets of Paris. There were similar scenes elsewhere. The Nazi official Albert Speer, arriving in Reims on June 26th, described untouched meals on tables laid with glasses, plates, and cutlery as though the lives of the town people had, for one moment, stood still. In the Loire Valley, a French tank commander preparing to defend a river crossing was killed by locals desperate to prevent their town from being caught up in a battle. Morale was a question of faith. How could these people have faith in the leaders who had abandoned them? Virginia Cowles, the American journalist describing the Exodus. An unlikely union. On June 11th, as German forces advanced at speed, French and British leaders had convened a meeting of the Supreme War Council. Churchill and his new War Minister, Anthony Eden, flew to Briare, south of Paris, to join French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud, his new Vice Premier, Marshal Philippe Pétain, and Weygand. British liaison officer Major General Edward Spears later recalled the ashen forces of the French ministers present and their evident defeatism. Only the young General Charles de Gaulle, recently made a junior war minister, showed any fighting spirit, backing Churchill was working desperately to persuade France to stay in the war. A few days later, de Gaulle also endorsed a radical proposal for the Franco-British reunion. The Policy Institute Chatham House had earlier drafted an act of perpetual association between the United Kingdom and France, which the Foreign Office had given serious consideration from March 1940. French diplomat Jean Monnet, head of the Anglo-French Coordination Committee, drew up the offer of a dissoluble union, which the British cabinet approved on June 16th. Although Churchill was skeptical with his blessing, de Gaulle telephoned a delighted Reynaud that afternoon. The plan was short-lived, however. The French Council of Ministers rejected it, fearing a British plot to dominate France. Pétain, who now felt that only capitulation and armistice with Germany could save France, declared that the union would be fusion with a corpse. Churchill later recalled the proposal's rejection as the narrowest escape we had, noting how much the union would have hamstrung Britain in the later years of the war. Inevitable collapse. Churchill's hopes that France could somehow still hold on until 1941 were fast evaporating. On June 14th, the Germans had entered a almost deserted Paris. The next day, they breached a large section of the Maginot Line. The historic fortress at Verdun fell, and German forces contained and trapped the French 3rd, 5th, and 8th armies at the Swiss border. 400,000 men surrendered en masse. On June 18th, the evacuation of the 2nd British Expeditionary Force, which had arrived France only about 2 weeks earlier, was completed. A day later, the Germans reached Nantes, having fanned out at high speed across France. Weygand advised Reynaud that defeat was inevitable and counseled against schemes to continue the fight from French colonies overseas. On June 17th, Reynaud resigned in favor of Pétain, and on June 20th, when the 16th Panzer Corps reached Lyon, he conceded a ceasefire. The French will to fight had crumbled. They had suffered an estimated 90,000 dead and 200,000 wounded, while 1.9 million people were missing or had been taken prisoner. German Army and Air Force deaths totaled 29,640, with 163,213 other casualties. In this colored picture, German troops on motorcycles study roadmaps of France as they pour into the country in the summer of 1940, frequently leaving commanding homes that the French had fled. Humiliating surrender. Not all Frenchmen had accepted defeat. Charles de Gaulle escaped France on June 16th, and 2 days later on the BBC, he broadcast a stirring message of defiance, exhorting his countrymen to believe in France's resurrection and eventual victory. The flames of French resistance must not and shall not die. Yet de Gaulle at this time was a relatively obscure figure, only weeks earlier promoted to brigadier general and having served only a fortnight in France's government. Weygand was scathing in his dismissal of de Gaulle's rallying cry, declaring that within 3 weeks England would have her neck wrung like a chicken. Of this, the court later found de Gaulle guilty of treason and sentenced him to death in absentia. One condition of the surrender the Germans dictated to France was that anyone supporting what de Gaulle and the British were calling the Free French would be subject to the death penalty. On the evening of June 22nd at Compiègne, 44 miles northeast of Paris, French General Charles Hunziker signed the formal surrender. Hitler insisted that the signing take place in the same railroad carriage in which 22 years earlier the French had accepted the German surrender. After viewing the nearby granite memorial to the 1918 armistice, Hitler ordered it to be destroyed. The greatest German humiliation of all time, wrote Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, had to be blotted out once and for all. France has lost the battle, but France has not lost the war. I ask you to believe me when I say the cause of France is not lost. Charles de Gaulle. The most terrible collapse in French history. Marcel Bloch, 1940, French industrialist. Under the terms of the surrender, 3/5 of French territory, including most of North and West and the entire Atlantic seaboard, had to submit to German occupation at a cost of 400 million francs, $8 million a day, to be borne by the French themselves. Pétain was installed as the president of a new État Français, ruling over the remainder known as Vichy France after the spa town in the Auvergne, where the Assemblée Nationale voted on July 10 to dissolve France's 70-year-old Third Republic. Dividing France. Having slaughtered their prey, the Germans now butchered it. Italy was permitted to annex the southeast corner of France around Nice, while parts of the north that bordered Belgium were placed under the aegis of the German military authorities in Brussels. Germany had annexed Alsace and Lorraine, and other areas of the northwest were reserved for future German colonization. The rest of the north was ruled by a German military government. Vichy France. Just 40% of French territory was left for Pétain, and his government was assigned to Vichy because the small town in central France with 300 hotels and the rooms to house the ministries and functionaries driven out of Paris, including some 100,000 civil servants. Pétain was enthusiastic as it had an international telephone exchange, good communications with Paris, and a pleasant climate. Here Pétain would set up what was, after the war, characterized as a relatively harmless and passive regime that simply tried to keep its citizens safe but was in reality an ambitious reactionary dictatorship. Pétain's rule oh, Pétain's rule was authoritarian, profoundly Catholic, hierarchical, and anti-Semitic. Most days the marshal would come out onto the balcony of the Hotel du Parc, his private residence and seat of the Vichy government, to hear supporters singing a popular song written in his honor. Marshal, nous voilà. Marshal, here we are. The 84-year-old Pétain thought of himself as a latter-day Joan of Arc, claiming that his new government would institute in La Révolution Nationale a movement for national revival. In practice, he was an old man, with periods of lucidity and energy interspersed with sleepiness and forgetfulness. He also oversaw a crudely abortionary reactionary regime. For instance, the crime of performing an abortion, Pétain sent Louise Guédon to the guillotine. She was the last woman in France to be executed in this way. While not full-blooded Nazis, the Vichy government comprised militant right-wing ideologues such as the author Robert Brasillach, who confessed just before his execution for collaboration in 1945 that they were bedfellows with the Germans and admitted they were close to their Nazi occupiers. In this picture, Mr. Hitler poses by the Eiffel Tower in Paris on June 23, 1940, the day after the signing of the French surrender at Compiègne. 5 days later, he visits Dieppe, also occupied the same year. Marshal, here we are, savior of France. We, your men, swear to serve and follow in your footsteps. André Montgard, French lyricist from the song Marshal, here we are. In France, Marshal, nous voilà. Vichy anti-Semitism. The institution of anti-Semitic laws was among the first acts of the Vichy regime, which began to round up Jews. Although French Jews survived in relatively high numbers in Vichy France, they were relegated to the status of second-class citizens. Foreign Jews who had fled into France as refugees were rounded up in what Germans called Razisen or Rays, French called rifles. In German-occupied France, too, thousands of French policemen collaborated with the SS to detain French and foreign Jews. In Paris, on July 16th through the 17th, during what was known as La Grande Rafle, the Great Raid, or the Veille du Rafle, as they were impounded in the Vélodrome d'Hiver cycling stadium, more than 12,000 Parisian Jews were arrested for deportation to concentration camps. 2 weeks later, more than 10,000 policemen in Vichy France joined a massive search for fugitive Polish and German Jews. The Italian-occupied area around Nice became a safe haven for Jews, with Mussolini insisting they be protected. This brief respite lasted only until Italian forces withdrew in September 1943. In the picture on the last page, child inmates of the Rivesaltes internment camp near Perpignan in Vichy France. The camp initially used to house Catalan refugees, later interned Jews sent on to Auschwitz. Forced labor. Pétain and his Vichy government remained popular with many of the French. While Pétain visited Notre Dame in Paris in April 1944, more people came out to cheer him than those who took to the streets as he did go when the city was liberated 4 months later. Initial enthusiasm for Vichy had been even greater, but two events had a highly adverse effect on Pétain's popularity. The first was Pétain's decision to stay in office when Germany occupied Vichy France in November 1942, which damaged his reputation as a staunch French patriot. The second was the institution of the Service de Travail Obligatoire, the compulsory draft of 650,000 French workers forced into labor in German factories from 1942 to 1944. It caused widespread resentment and persuaded many to join French resistance movements. Vichy collaborators. From its creation in January 1943, the primary force countering the resistance was the Milice, a Vichy paramilitary organization that relentlessly pursued and persecuted members of the resistance and French refugees. Milice squads carried out torture and massacres. In one atrocity, in the Loire Valley in July 1944, a milice unit led by violent anti-Semite Joseph Le Coussin pushed 36 Jews into 3 wells and threw in sacks of cement and stones to crush them alive. Although Pétain made weak formal objections, he did nothing to stop such barbarity. By the end of the war, Vichy France deported up to 80,000 Jews and turned 70,000 enemies of the state and put on trial 135,000 French citizens. Germany's control of France was aided by the scale of collaboration among the French. Thousands spied for the Gestapo for small monthly stipends, and tens of thousands of anonymous denunciations were sent to the Gestapo. In the absence of some 1.5 million Frenchmen held prisoner of war, liaisons between German troops and French women were numerous, with as many as 200,000 babies born as a result. Collaborators were also motivated by hunger. Half of all food produced in France between 1940 and 1944 were requisitioned by the Germans. It took time for post-war France to come to terms with its Vichy past. It was not until 1995 that President Jacques Chirac first acknowledged France's role in the Jewish genocide. In this picture, a Vichy poster declares no more bad days, Dad makes money in Germany, in a bid to make forced labor seem attractive. The initial request became conscription under new Vichy laws. Charles de Gaulle. Born in Lille in 1890, the son of a professor, de Gaulle had been a young infantry officer in World War I, wounded 3 times and taken prisoner. In the interwar years, he studied modern warfare and proposed that France's army should be more mobile and mechanized, but with little success. When World War II broke out, he was the commander of a tank regiment. With political patronage from Paul Reynaud, in early June 1940, he was promoted to the rank of brigadier general during the government and traveled to London meeting Churchill, whom he impressed. When France fell and Pétain replaced Reynaud as France's leader, de Gaulle left for Britain. Over the next 4 years, he built the Free French into a government in waiting, and in August 1944, he made a triumphant entry to Paris. De Gaulle's Free French ensured that the French played a part in the war and in their own liberation. He himself went on to serve as his country's president until January 1946, and again from 1958 to 1969. He died at his home at Colombe de l'Aiguille in 1970.